There we go. So I'd like to welcome you all to our session with Dina Ely. And she is a board certified holistic health practitioner. And she's developed a nature inspired ecotherapy model that she's going to share with us today um, to help us look at the ground between scarcity and excess. And her description is that nature shows us life flourishing through sufficiency, not excess. But as these times swing between us and the anxiety of scarcity and the pressure of more, we can lose sight of what supports us. So this session will explore enough as a clearer, steadier approach to our work and lives so that we can trust what we have, return to the present, and make choices that sustain rather than deplete us. So that's our wonderful session for today. Thank you so much, Dina, for being willing to come and share your creativity, your innovation, and your insights.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm really looking forward to discussing this with you all and hopefully hearing some insights of your own because I know this is a topic that we've all heard of and these concepts aren't necessarily new to us. Scarcity mindset and abundance mindset have been part of the lexicon for quite a long time in personal wellness, and also on a leadership level. Um, and what falls in between, which is enough, which I know, Kathy, you've also written some great blog posts about that I've read in the past. Um, but what I'm going to focus on in this talk is less about the definitions as we know them and more about what the definitions are right now and how that they actually no longer really serve us in these times. So I'm going to turn a couple things on their head and be a little revolutionary in my suggestions. And I don't mean it with any offense for people who um, really espouse some of the topics that I'm going to talk about here, but more to the idea that we need to find a healthier place to operate out of personally and as leaders so that the entire organization and communities and everything else that surrounds us can flourish in what we actually have right now because tomorrow's never guarantee. So, um, I'm gonna keep going back and forth with examples or a little inspiration from nature because that's what I do. So I wanted to start out by talking about bees briefly because I was so inspired this past spring by encountering a bumblebee whose her hind legs were just covered in sacks of nectar. And she was asleep in this little bell-shaped flower with her little butt hanging out and her little nectar-covered legs. And I thought, you know, a bee doesn't lose sleep wondering about the nectar that she's gathered or will gather tomorrow. Just when she's flown as much as she can and she's pollinated enough and gathered enough, she rests. And that's so indicative of the natural design. Nature doesn't chase more just for the sake of having more. It does what it's meant to do, which is respond to need. And when that need is met, it rests and it doesn't feel guilty about it. And it doesn't feel like it's going to fall behind. It just knows what is enough. So, from our standpoint, what enough is needs to be seeing the real supports, whether they're visible or invisible, that hold us in the present. They are what we have that we can rely on, whether we recognize them readily or not. And we do this so that we can move out of reactivity and urgency and this sense of constant threat and into clarity and steadiness and sufficiency so we can make those choices that sustain us and live in a way that is sustainably or sustainable for our energy and our wellness and our organization's wellness. And so we can live in the moment. And um and again, this looking back at nature, really it's this is nature doesn't think in scarcity. The mindset of scarcity and abundance is kind of uniquely human. It is a human construct, but our ability to ruminate and to perseverate does not exist in nature. It's a uniquely human experience, um, and largely a product, I believe, of how disconnected we are from nature because we're part of it, but we live in a way where we are so separated from the ecosystems that we're part of that we just don't see that it could be easier than we're making it. Um, so if nature doesn't think in scarcity, it also doesn't overinflate with abundance. It knows exactly what it needs. And that means it flourishes in what's sufficient, in sufficiency. So enough becomes almost an ecological pattern of regulation or a way to regulate. It's not just settling. It's not a consolation prize. It's not saying, okay, you've tried enough and giving a participation trophy. Enough is saying you're safe. You have things that you need to get by right now, and you're blessed and celebrating what we have in this very moment. So I personally advocate for banishing these old definitions of scarcity and abundance in mindsets because they've become, in the case of scarcity, a default state for way too many people. And in the sense of abundance, a default obsession for people and organizations. And getting rid of them means learning to trust in what we actually have, see it and trust it. So a scarcity mindset tells us that there's not enough of what we need for all of us to survive. And it throws us into competition with ourselves and with others and makes us feel like we're always one step behind. And we're worrying about what happens if we run out. What if we don't have enough? What if we are not enough? And if there's not enough, then what's the point of even trying at all, which is the saddest part of it. It convinces us to hustle and work harder to take more than we may actually need and to stay one step ahead at all times. And if we can't, we feel shame or anxiety. And psychological research into the burden of poverty found that just one instance of financial scarcity can rewire our nervous systems and shrink our mental bandwidth. So when we experience scarcity and we're so afraid of that feeling of scarcity, we get stuck in that scarcity mindset. Our brains start treating everyday life like it's an emergency. And we do everything we can to avoid going through that again. And that becomes then our focus. Now, on the other side, abundance in the before times, which is the way I look at before the rise of some of these concepts of manifesting and visualization and things that have become very popular. They have a place. They do good. But in abundance, a traditional abundance mindset says the world is full of possibilities and there's more enough than enough. There are more than enough resources to go around. It gives us hope. It inspires generosity and gratitude. But if we add to that the idea of manifesting abundance because we don't feel as though we actually have it, we start to deny reality rather than value what reality actually is for us. And I call that toxic abundance to kind of differentiate it from the traditional definition of abundance. Toxic abundance is a twist of this definition. It acknowledges that there's enough, but what it does is inspires people to say, there's enough, therefore I deserve a piece of it. Or if I work hard enough and manifest something hard enough, that peace will come to me. I will have my piece of abundance. Instead of recognizing that abundance actually is a thing that exists around us, all of us have it and can share it, and trusting that, it's really just abundance now intrinsically tied to more, to having more, getting more, wanting more. Whereas true abundance, the definition that we have used, is actually now more closely aligned with enough and enoughness. Toxic abundance leads us to hustle, to accumulate, to hoard, to constantly plan, to set new goals without settling into the ones that we have already accomplished, and to manifest obsessively to the point where we're afraid to even think about something bad because what if it becomes a reality? It's contrary to what I'm trying to make happen in my life. But I still have these thoughts about a time when I was traumatized by not having enough. And if we force ourselves as individuals or as leaders to think we're never going to look back on the past or look back on these unfinished businesses that we have, leaving emotions and situations unprocessed or in an organizational framework, not going back and looking at what failed in the past and finding where the successes actually maybe were that we didn't see, or the opportunities to change to move towards success. That's just scarcity mindset in disguise, honestly. So, Jack Bogle, who founded the Vanguard Group, whether you like him or loathe him, he asked the question, when is enough enough? And he recognized that true wealth is in things like friendships and purpose and contribution, not accumulation. And this is important to the organizational leadership side of things as well. Even if we get an excess that we consider to be abundance, we have a thing, our brains are built in with a thing called hedonic adaptation, which is a mechanism that returns us to a baseline emotional state. So even if we're super excited about something, we get something we've really wanted, we achieve that goal, it feels great. What's no longer novel after a while stops being exciting. And that means when we're talking about business or we're talking about our personal goals and feeling like if I achieve a certain amount of money, say if I get $1 million, everything will be fixed. So having $1 million then goes from a thrill to a worry when hedonic adaptation kicks in about what happens if that 1 million runs out. Maybe I actually need to have 2 million just in case. And I also kind of look at this in a weird way. I know that it was born out of fear during the height of the COVID lockdowns, but emptying every store of toilet paper, and just having, I swear there's still toilet paper somewhere in my closet. If I opened it up and looked in the back of the linen closet, there would be toilet paper from that era. And I think that's the case for a lot of us. It sort of operates the same way, whether or not it's coming from that kind of fear. We get something, hedonic adaptation kicks in, and we think, well, actually, now in order to keep that feeling of being okay up, I need to have more. So it's a slippery slope, and it's something that we have to bear in mind when we are chasing abundance instead of accepting that abundance is actually present and we're benefiting from it all the time. So everything we'll talk about today applies to organizations as well as individuals. Um, every time we react with panic because our metrics reveal a downward trend or we see profits dip, we lead from scarcity. And every time we have exactly what we need, but still push for more to make some stakeholders happy or just to get ahead, we're caught in this toxic abundance that I've talked about. And the individuals in our organizations may be living this way too, professionally and personally, and that affects how they show up in work. It affects why they work. It affects their ability to accept or understand or appreciate the purpose of their work, the purpose of the organization, because they're functioning either from scarcity or for thinking, if we get more, if I perform more, if I overachieve, if I bring this abundance to the picture, then that somehow defines their worth or defines their security. So I think what we really need is a new paradigm where we leave those definitions behind and we think about what falls in between them. What is the enough? So embracing enough isn't about settling for what we've got or settling for not having enough, or it's about noticing and trusting that what exists in our life right now is getting us through till tomorrow. It is the place where we name what we already have, like the roof over our heads, comfort food when we need it, lesson that we learned in school that has stuck with us, or a friend who's always there to listen to us when we need them. And embracing enough gives us the grace to rest without giving up. As I'm not saying find enough and stop setting goals, or find enough and suddenly your bills will be magically paid. I'm saying enough says I'm supported right now, even as I'm growing, whether that growth is out of a place of scarcity or toward a place where I have my goals and my dreams and my aspirations. I'm still operating and living in this place of being supported. So nature doesn't obsess over whether or not there's enough to go around. And it also doesn't spin off into a manic spiral that we often do of forcing itself to believe that there's more than enough for every living thing. So nature doesn't have any delusions about the resources that are available to it. It's affected by scarcity. We know that food shortages are a thing in nature. Climate change is causing all sorts of issues with habitats in nature, but it doesn't lose hope. It's not built that way. It's built to survive and to sustain life. It's not caught up in the emotions that we have. It solves problems and then it continues learning how to survive and thrive with enough, with what it has. And it will sometimes experience abundance, but it doesn't take all of what it possibly can, hoard it, and then ask for more. If there's abundance, then great. That just means that the job of surviving is easier. Um, it prepares, it doesn't panic, and it doesn't try to control, plan ahead, worry about what's going to happen, with the exception of something like a hibernating animal that will prepare what it needs to get through a lean period of time. But on the whole, nature doesn't worry about, the weather forecast. It's just going to accept what happens when it comes. It trusts in cycles like the seasons, and the natural rhythms like the day and night cycle. We are part of nature. We have divorced ourselves from it, but at the end of the day, we are not machines designed to produce endlessly. We're living beings, and we are meant to have our seasons to bloom. We're meant to have our seasons to gather and harvest. We're meant to have our seasons to rest and to begin again when we need to. That's just the way that we should be. And like everything else in the natural world, that means being willing to accept that we don't need everything. We just need enough to function that way. So, how we find enough in this new paradigm where we've theoretically erased this worry about scarcity and toxic abundance. Before I talk about specifically how, I will just talk about why why it works to find enough and to trust in enough. The part of our brain that we engage when we focus on these manifestation and visualization exercises is called the reticular activating system, and it's the goal setting part of our brain. So it learns to focus on the goals that we set and filters out other noise. So we can trigger it with very specific language, like using the words I intend or my intention, and reinforcing it with affirmations and visual aids like vision boards, which are really popular. People even will use it to plan their daily lives, a visual planner where you actually sit down and write things out or organize your life in such a way that at a glance you can tell what has to be done, what your goals are, whether they're micro or macro. Um, that is activating that part of your brain. So, what if our goal then was simply to recognize the supports that we have if we're looking to appreciate enough and live? Alexa, stop. I apologize. My son is home from school, and that was him setting the Alexa off. Um, the So neuroplasticity is where this kicks in now. Neuroplasticity is our fantastic ability to actually reshape our brain. We can do it after catastrophic events like a stroke, and we can do it just in everyday practice. But the old idea that our brains stop growing after a certain point and we only lose rather than create synapses and brain structure are actually being proven false all the time. So neuroplasticity teaches us that if we mindfully repeat something every day, for example, at just kind of a regular interval. So I think daily is a good way to measure it. We build new neurons that help us establish new beliefs and new ways of living. And so they actually become second nature. They become easy to believe, right? So we need a reflective practice that we can do and repeat until it's easy for us to believe in what we truly have, to believe in the enough that we have, so that we can easily differentiate when we're slipping in and out of scarcity and toxic abundance and leave them behind. So I have a practice that I teach and also do myself that I really enjoy. And it's very much modeling nature. But before we launch into a practice like this, we have a few questions that we need to consider. And they will be in chat. These are kind of like broader questions that you can reflect on before you implement your own practice, or something to kind of talk to somebody at work about, that you know, another leader on your team, or something that you can discuss with somebody close to you, or just something you can reflect on yourself. But these questions are, there's five of them, and the first three are what helps you solve the problems that you face in your life from day to day? What helps you get through the hard days? And what helps you sort of appreciate the little wins that you encounter? So that's the first thing you have to think about, because that helps you identify some supports. And then it's important to think about the supports that you've maybe overlooked, the ones that have been with you longer than you've realized. And these go way back. Some of our supports are the teacher that we had in elementary school who taught us something really important that we think back on and think, oh yeah, I miss that teacher or whatever. Those are supports. They may not seem like something practical that we draw on every day, but they're part of what we have that gets us through. And to look at what is carrying us right now. So in this moment, what do we have that is actually helping us more than we realize? And I would say off the top of my head right now, we all have, I'm imagining we all have electricity right now. I'm not running off a generator. In New Jersey, I am frequently running off a generator because it's really windy here all the time here now, but not right now. And we have internet, so we're able to have this session. Those are some pretty neat supports that are carrying us right in this moment. And then the other two questions really have to do with just making sure that we're not taking anything for granted. Which of these resources that I've just thought about are the ones that I frequently overlook, that I frequently don't realize are holding me up or contributing to me having enough to get through the day? And how can recognizing these supports and these resources free my time and energy up to enjoy the present moment? Because I've already got them, even if I don't realize it, and they're already helping me get through the day. That means I have a little bit more time and energy available to focus on something positive instead of spending all of our time spinning our wheels in scarcity or trying to chase abundance. So with that kind of reflection out of the way, then my exercise that I like to do, and there's two versions that I recommend. If somebody is really kind of a geek about nature like me, I'll usually say, look at mycelium underground, the underground network of mycelium that connect all of the plants and trees and bits and pieces of soil, the fungal roots underneath the forest. Or a little bit more accessible, I'll say think about a tree where you have roots that spread wide underneath the ground, and then you have branches that spread wide above the ground. And that division, um, the visible supports are your branches, and the invisible supports, the ones that you kind of overlook or don't realize that you have or that are less tangible, are your roots. And that's a good way to differentiate when you're actually doing this exercise, which is literally just to draw a tree, draw roots and draw the branches, your little trunk in between. You don't have to be an artist to do this. I have doodled some really ugly trees doing this regularly. And then sometimes I get really into it and I make actually pretty trees and I add a little color. But, that's just whether or not I have the time and inspiration to do it. But there's no right or wrong way, as I think Bob Ross would agree to draw our tree. But in this case, every single root and every single branch is something that's supporting us. And when we do this exercise, it doesn't have to be the same ones every single day, but it's the ones that are on our mind when we're doing this reflection. So our top of the tree might be, if it's visible, it might be the roof over our heads, it might be the food, it might be the investments that we have, it might be our career. It might be this computer that we're sitting in front of right now. Whatever it is that is easy to see and recognize is the visible part above the ground. And then underneath the invisible part, those are things like our skills and education. Those are things like our health. And they're even things like relationships. I consider those to be invisible because we take them for granted so easily. And it would be great if they were all visible and we were appreciative of our relationships all the time. But the fact of the matter is, we tend to take for granted that we have somebody to talk to. And so that becomes an invisible, but no less important resource. So that's under the soil for us. That is just there. So if you do this every day, write on that root or on that branch or next to it the name of the thing that you're naming. My boyfriend, for me, nature, my son, my job, and whatever, my house, whatever I want to put in that particular day. So you're reinforcing it. The act of drawing pulls into the act of actually drawing lines like this is really good for neuroplasticity. There's a whole school of art therapy called neuro art and another one called neurographica, very specifically that deals with drawing lines because the neurons and neural pathways in our brain are lines, and so that flow feels very natural. So drawing those roots and branches helps, and then writing out the words that each one helps to reinforce as we're doing this every day, what it is that is making us feel supported and safe and confident in enough in this moment. And then the last thing that you do, one of the most important pieces, and the thing that actually brings this enough into harmony with the old definition of abundance is one sentence of gratitude. Whatever it may be. It could be the same thing every day. I am thankful for what I have. Or maybe today, I am thankful for, the movie I'm about to watch because I've been wanting to watch it and I finally have time to watch it. Or I am thankful for my paycheck, whatever it may be. And you can apply this to your organization as well, your business. I am thankful for the fact that this campaign went really well, or this team, this individual is performing really well, and whatever it is that you are grateful for. We have to loop gratitude in with our sense of abundance and security and enough, because that's when positive psychology principles like generosity and openness kick in. And that's where we can start to not only live in our enough and to enjoy the present moment because we finally feel like we're safe enough and we have what we need to get through the day. Maybe it's not everything that we want, but it's enough to live in this moment. Then, when we have that and we're grateful for that, we start to see we actually have some things that we can share with others and we can be open to doing that. And then that strengthens community. And I think right now, that is incredibly important. We know these are tumultuous times, and we know that there are a lot of people living in scarcity, and that probably isn't going to improve very quickly. And so when we realize that we have enough, we start to see maybe where we have enough to go around. And that's just bringing that beautiful old concept of abundance back to reality instead of worrying about abundance being how can I continue to get more, or how can I carve out my slice of the pie, or whatever it is that has now been twisted into this toxic definition. We're inviting the old sense of security and the old sense of the beauty of there being enough for everybody into our lives. And that makes us kind of want to share it naturally. So there is one thing I want to say, final note before I kind of just open this up if anybody has any thoughts they want to share. I do want to differentiate or make it clear that I'm not saying there's anything wrong with wanting more, in the sense that, having more than strictly necessary, whether it's some dessert. Or I think of my crows. I have this family of crows that I belong to. I say that very casually, but I'm surprised that they are not screaming outside the window right now. They normally are. Um, and they really like shiny things. Naturally, that's crows and ravens love shiny, interesting things. And so they'll kind of covet them a little bit, but that's coming more from a place of intellectual curiosity than it is just simply wanting to hoard them. And often I will notice that they'll want that thing, they'll take it, whatever it is. If it's something, they sometimes will run off with something on my property, and then they'll put it back later. which isn't the case for all crows. I'm sure some crows have stashes that somebody discovers bunches of stuff in because they just never do anything with it. But it's okay to want the shiny thing and to go for that every once in a while. Just don't let that be the default. And when you do it from a place of desire. Don't do it from a place of desperation, because that's the difference. The difference in getting something that's a little treat doesn't come from desperation. It's the joy of having something. It's not chasing something. You already have enough, and therefore it's okay to want a special treat on top of it, as long as that's not your default mode of operation, because then you're just hustling again for excess. So you're allowed to want, you're allowed to grow, you're allowed to have days where you're feeling the scarcity, but you're also allowed to, and I think I really encourage you um, to dwell in a place of enough, to get to where you realize that you have enough to make it. And at the end of the day, you're going to be okay because you have a roof, you have food. And even if you think that's only for today, today's enough. So. So that being said, I would be very interested if anybody has any thoughts, opinions, or reflections on this idea of scarcity and abundance and how it's applying to your lives, your organizations right now, or this idea of enough, or anything really. If you have any questions, not just for me, but for anybody here in the room, I would be very interested to hear it. And also, if you want to explore more of this, I have a three-part series that I wrote about on my Substack. Um, that covers what I've talked about here today. And then there's a couple more in the series that go deeper into specifics of things like community, how they're affected by enough. So we've got that link to put in the chat.
I used to work at a Benedictine college, and that was where I first was introduced to the idea of enoughness. And um, it was a practice that they invited themselves into. Um, and so, and it invited the rest of us who were not part of the Benedictine community, but working there, to look at our own lives and assess our closets from the framework of enoughness, for example, or all of the different possessions that we have. And so, it's been 25 years since I left that job. But during my 9 years there and the 25 years after, I do practice enoughness, but I still have too much stuff, which is the interesting paradox of the practice for me.
Yeah, and it doesn't necessarily come from consciously accumulating it either. I know I look around all the time and I think I can see how much of the things that I have are gifts. And we have a lot of other aspects of things like sentimentality and stuff that aren't necessarily present in nature either, and aren't inherently bad, but they do tend to contribute to us having more than what we need sometimes. And I love this idea of death cleaning that isn't popular in Sweden, where you basically just cut things down to what you would be okay leaving, and there's something very cathartic and about going through periodically, and I give things away to local charities um, for their, block sales and things like that. Um, and just letting go sometimes feels good because you're opening a space, right? So
I had a friend who believed that every time she cleaned out her closet, she was making space for another stage of her evolution
I love that.
as a person.
Hmm.
And because you always feel lighter when you get stuff out of your house, at least I do.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it is, yeah, another friend of mine, um, she developed a calendar of that she literally has planned out on the different sections of her house that she is going in and clearing. Um, and she recently, 6 months ago, her husband, longtime husband, died, and so this kind of schedule for going through different parts of the house is part of that grieving process for her. But I thought to myself, gee, to have that on your calendar and identified, well, the garage is going to take 6 weeks, so she has 6 weeks, sometime this spring to go through the garage. Uh,
Mhm.
but I thought that maybe I should add a little bit of that discipline to me.
I
Anyway.
love that. I think I should too. I love it.
Mhm.
That's great.
Dina, something you said that really resonates is this idea of how, when we're in a place of scarcity, how we respond differently, right?
Mhm.
Biologically, neurologically, from fear, from just what's driving us. I think you said it nicely. When are we pursuing something from a place of desire or desperation? And I
Mhm.
can notice in myself when I'm feeling scarcity, it's easy to act from that place. And I have to catch myself and say, okay, it's enough. We're fine for now. And then I can think and actually be more strategic thinking into the future, whether it's for my work or for my family. But it's definitely a practice to notice when I slip into that mindset of scarcity and then bring myself back. And then it's another practice to be in groups of people, right? Organizations, communities, and being able to notice when other people are slipping into that and kindly and gently trying to help them notice to bring them back to a centered place so that we can make decisions not out of fear and scarcity.
Yeah. And that's a really, really important point when you're doing this with other people. We have to bear in mind that we may not see in ourselves until we start doing this reflection, um, but we can start to see pretty quickly in other people, is that when we've existed in a state of scarcity long enough, we almost start to resent having to pull ourselves out of it. And, it's like we just kind of go, well, I don't what do you mean? I have, I don't, that support doesn't matter. It's not, we just get a very kind of bristly reaction to changing, to confronting really that we're existing in a place of scarcity and fear, and that we can bring ourselves out of that when that has been going on long enough and it feels normal. We think it feels comfortable. We don't necessarily realize that what we're doing is operating out of constant fight or flight because that's just normal for us. So, um, when you're working with groups of people, you have to be really aware of who is reacting, who's bristling to it, who seems reticent, who seems hesitant, and who keeps falling back into the old ways, operating from scarcity because it's very foreign to them to do something else. And a lot of people resist change. So,
I'm really appreciating like hearing this dialogue. And I mean, Dina, you referenced the distinction between like material enoughness and psychological enoughness. And Kathleen and Daniel, like your comments are have me really reflecting on how material enoughness can distract us from the psychological enoughness. And I wonder some of that dynamic of halting the pursuit of more and more is, it's partly about, do we want to look inward and kind of confront that psychological dimension? um yeah.
mm. I love that. I think that's absolutely true. And I think a lot of what we set our goals for, um, are really just kind of distractions sometimes from, personally at least, from what we really need to process and what we need to accept. And it's a lot easier to set your sights on something and to start jumping in and hustling toward and being excited genuinely to be working toward a goal than to sit with what we have. And I think I mentioned this idea of setting goals without um, settling into the ones we've already achieved, because I think that's really, really common nowadays. We're kind of expected to constantly push the envelope, constantly work on the next thing. Okay, I've ticked off this on my to-do list. What's next? So we don't really sit with what, whether it's a win or a failure or whatever, but we don't sit with the outcome of having finished a goal before we move on to something else. And I think that's certainly when it's material, that becomes a much easier trap to fall into, because it's something we can measure and feel or calculate. And yeah, that concreteness kind of makes it a very opaque thing in what really is a matter of seeing the transparencies and seeing through everything and the intricacies of what actually makes us feel secure.
Our organizations, there used to be a term in management called the rubber band goal, that once you set your goal, you'd stretch. And then the closer you would get, you wouldn't ever achieve it and then pause. If you got close, you would then set the bar higher or
Hmm.
farther or whatever. So it was a very interesting practice that never let us pause and celebrate the movement forward, because you were always setting up the more.
Hmm.
Wow.
And that seems really powerful in thinking about like a leader's psychological tendencies, and then an organization to think about if you can bring in that sense of like, let's really absorb what's happened here and the progress, and a very different climate than just, okay, what's the next thing? Yeah.
Yeah.
And it makes me go to the idea that systems always scale. It's one of the characteristics of them. And so when you have a person that hasn't worked through some of this stuff, and then they become a leader of whether it's a community board or a business or an organization, they bring that, whether it's the toxic abundance or uh, what's the term? What term did you use for the scarcity? The scarcity mindset, I guess.
It's just scarcity. Yeah. I
It
mean,
will come in and,
hasn't
and
changed.
it will reflect. So if it isn't happening on the individual level, it will then start shaping how they lead a team or lead an organization or a division. And then, the interaction between individual development and organizational culture will also constrict or um, encourage evolution individually. So
Hmm.
there's a lot of interplay here. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the through line to the topic of adult development is very real here.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
Yeah.
Um, Dina, thank you so
Hmm.
much. I'm always super grateful to be on these calls, and I always learn so much. Um, I'm just thinking, working with organizations, if they haven't already gotten to this point of enough, how do you start it off and meet them where they are?
I think that it has to be for leaders, kind of similar really to the way that we would do this reflection for ourselves.
Hmm.
Because, an organization is very much like a human. It's very much a living, breathing thing. Um, so I think you have to start with that kind of reflection of what you have right now that is an asset for, I have a love-hate relationship with that word. But something that is an asset that we can name. What is it that right now I know we could rely on if we needed to, if we had, a really disastrous quarter or something? What do we have right now that we can be sure of? And that might be something like the talent of your team. That might end up being a lot of intangible things. Um, but I think that you have to start with that same reflection piece before you can do anything else. A leader has to look holistically at the business, at the organization, and look at those, try to name those supports before you can involve the rest of the people in the organization in recognizing it. Because you have to see and believe and be able to argue why something matters to everybody else before you can jump in to arguing why something matters to everybody else. So it's a big part of that, really, just kind of doing that reflection, but on the larger organizational scale. And in a way, I think it's actually almost easier for organizations if they've been measuring things, if they have been keeping track of metrics, then you can sit down and you can actually look at data that then back up what you have and what you don't have, what has worked, what hasn't worked, what can you rely on as a function of your business that is going to hold you today. And that is something, in our personal lives, we don't have a lot of metrics. We can kind of sit down and look at our bank balance and a few other things. But we tend to have more obvious signs of deficit than we do metrics that would measure success. The bills start piling up or whatever. So organizationally, I think that those concrete pieces of doing healthy business that exist actually give leaders kind of an edge on how easy this becomes but they have to believe in it first. They have to do that and feel comfortable and confident in it before they can loop in the rest of the organization, in my opinion.
I
Thank
think
you.
another question on the measures around the scarcity mentality or the toxic abundance is that this is another default. We have defaulted to approximations of what we care about in measurements as opposed to actual measuring. So I'm working with an organization now. They work with people with different abilities, so their board is asking for metrics, but the deeper question that their board members are making is, does this organization have a significant impact on the quality of life of the people that we serve?
Okay.
And the organization is thinking of it as a traditional kind of key performance indicators, which are about numbers of people served and things like that, or it's the budget balanced and stuff like that. So going to a deeper so I'm just noticing that tension in my work, and then I'll lift it up and then see what they want to do with it. But I just find that I think a lot of our measures aren't really measuring what we deeply care about. And we've lost sight that the proxy measures are actually what counts. And then I think that feeds into this toxic abundance.
Yeah.
And I was also thinking about Dale, because we've done a lot of work together in Nebraska in rural communities, and the scarcity mindset came up with a self-defeating kind of prophecy that these small communities were just thinking about when they were going to die. And so it created such a scarcity mindset in the community about how it saw its future. We were both connected to this Nebraska Community Foundation that was building philanthropic unrestricted assets in rural communities that they could then use to help support the thrivability. But we used Joanna Macy's work on active hope as a way to shift the self-defeating prophecy of their community to believing that their active hope means that you can imagine a better future And then you wake up every day, whether your actions will make a difference or not, but you wake up every day in alignment with the future you're trying to create.
Mhm.
And I think that worked as a leverage point in helping people to imagine a different future.
That's a beautiful approach. I really, really like that. I love Joanna Macy's work. She was something else. Yeah. No, that's a wonderful approach. And I know that you have talked about um, conflating kind of the busyness of what we do with the purpose of what we do. And when you have a successful metrics that are measuring success, that it's easy to look at that as doing well as opposed to are we accomplishing what we set out to accomplish or what we should be accomplishing. So that's also another important piece of it when you're reflecting on this organizationally. I mentioned having metrics as a concrete way, a starting point to measure what you have and what you don't have. But I think ultimately you do also have to consider, particularly when you're kind of replacing this manifesting or manically trying to hustle toward some kind of goal of abundance with accepting what you have, that your purpose really is a very powerful, again, use that word asset, that kind of it feels like not a sufficient word when you're talking about describing purpose, but it becomes really a core thing that you have. It is one of your intangible, invisible supports, and maybe one of your strongest ones in an organization because it's the thing that your whole team can believe in, can feel, bonds them, you know.
And the other thought I had was that I've noticed, so I work primarily with nonprofits, but I've noticed that we have an organizational version of long COVID where we were so focused on adapting to make it through the day, the week, the month, the quarter, that we have lost deeper reflective questions because the carryover of long COVID is we're still focused on the short term as opposed to the longer term. And this could be wishful thinking, but as I think about my work pre-COVID with nonprofit organizations, is that they were a place where deeper questions were asked.
Mhm.
And I think that ability has weakened and our focus has been more activity driven rather than deeper purpose and meaning. And so I'm wondering, Jackie, if um, another little tiny little leverage for shifting an organization might be just the quality of deeper questions that might be um, encouraged or creating conditions where deeper questions can be asked. I have a friend who works for a big tech company, and he was talking about the nature of their meetings, and the nature of their meetings was that it's all stacked up. You have more items to talk about than you have time. And so
Mhm.
there is no spaciousness for a deeper question from anybody in the room in the meeting because it's all keep going, keep,
Yep.
you know. So I always look for what is the smallest thing that we can do that can shift something to the highest possibility because this is another kind of enoughness question because most of our organizational change questions tend to be how big do we have to go in order to make the change as opposed to what is the smallest we can do that will allow for the natural living system to adjust itself. And so those become more kind of interesting questions to me. And we have pretty much run out of time here. Dina, this was just lovely. Thank you so much for coming and sharing your thinking. And I love your observations from nature and how they weave into your thinking as a holistic practitioner, health practitioner. So
Thank you.
really
And
lovely.
thank you all. It was lovely to meet you and to talk to you guys.
Yeah, thank you. And we
Thank you
will
so
be
much.
back April 21st on restorative adult development. So thank you.
Nice.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Kathleen, for
Thank you.
holding this space.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dina.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Dina.
The Climate Coaching Alliance, Daniel sent to Christy, that would be lovely too. Yeah. You should come and talk to us about your work.
Oh yeah, would love that. Ooh, yeah, I'm gonna take that link and look at that in a bit.
So thanks, Christy. And
Thanks,
maybe
Christy.
you could come back in August at and do the Climate Coaching Alliance, because you're doing great work. So that's a yes. Put your email in there and I'll connect with you. I don't know if I have it. But thank you so much for coming, and thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
So
All
long.
right.
Okay.